Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay and see the presentation. The welcome slide is currently up that we're starting now. It's a little bit after 10. So if you are dropped or if I'm dropped from this session for more than 5 minutes, I mean, I don't return within 5 minutes or so, just look for the recording of this particular session that I'll post on Canvas. I am recording now. Now, just to get us started, I want to go ahead and remind why we're doing these particular sessions. So today, the agenda, the purpose of the meeting. What I do, hope to do during these particular sessions is to provide you and review some key information of some of the topics that we would have covered during a given week and provide you guys, the students, the opportunity to ask some live questions and to get some clarifications. Today, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to look over the last exam review. We completed a review of Unit 1 not too long ago, and I want to talk about some of the items from that. And then we're going to be talking about what particular chapter we covered this week, starting off this section on philosophy of mind. And then, of course, it'll always be open to question and answer, hopefully, or comments if you have any. Before we move on from this slide, you can see it says, using the chat feature, send to me, your host, present. This is one way I can just make sure that I have people being indicated that they are here. So if there's any additional points I can provide, I'll do so at that time. Uh, but also, please note, if you signed on to this particular session and didn't use your name, used a different type of handle, please put in the message, the chat message you send to me, what name you are, what name you have, so that I can make sure you get credit for it. Are there any questions about that? Okay, go ahead and start with the chat feature. Uh, Hopefully you know where it is. All right, great. I start to see them now. All right, exactly. So we do that for a while. I'll wait a little bit and then I'll move on to the next slide. Now, you guys should have received a presentation in an email that I sent last night. It is, for the most part, the presentation that you'll be seeing today. The next slides that I will be going over just after the next one, we'll be focusing on the exam as I was talking to you about. And then we'll move in with the discussion of chapter 4, Rene Descartes' Philosophy of Mind and Dualism. Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. Continue with the chat messages to me so I can have that. All right, so moving on, I just want to remind us of how the course is intended to flow. You have completed already the first unit or module of this course. You see that we have the chapters identified. There'll be materials available to you as well as part of study and preparation for that particular unit or module. Reading the textbook chapters, again, I know the chapters are not that long, but they are very dense and sometimes difficult to understand. You need to also complete the chapter quiz homeworks, review and annotate the lecture notes, which are provided to you as well. And then we have the viewing the video lectures and completing the video lectures with discussions when they have those included. I also noted that I'm a little bit behind on a couple of things this term so far. So your chapter 5 video lecture should be done sometime today. I realize we have a holiday coming up as well for Monday. So I'm going to push the next essay a little bit so that you guys can have some more time with that. I'll touch base with the classes as well to make sure they are aware of that as well. So we have that video discussion questions tied to our video lectures, and then we also have a few standalone discussion forums as well. Normally, before we start the unit exam, I'll have a review session or a study guide made available to you, and then you will complete the unit test. So that is the normal process that we follow for each unit or module that we go through. So I just want to make sure and remind you of that so you don't miss any particular type of assignments, hopefully. Okay, are there any questions before I start the exam 1 review? Okay, so real quickly, I usually do adjust the grades a little bit for this class, and the exam number 1 grades will be adjusted soon as well. Usually the average is going to be around an 80 or so, around a B. The averages were not bad this outing for the exam. There, it was a C, but I will boost that a little bit up to a B. There are a few items that people had some issue with, and I'll talk about some of those as we go through this exam one review. So a couple of things. I'll just go through this bullet list that we have here, and I will post these bulleted items for you a little bit later on your Canvas site as well. All right, so quickly, in studying history, there's the term called presentism. And what presentism really is, it takes into account where we are today, current knowledge, current views. And so it can be a little bit judgmental or judgy in a way, simply because what we're doing is we are looking at past behaviors, past actions, but we're looking at it from the perspective of where we are now, our current knowledge, our current values, and our current beliefs. So this would be akin to looking back and say that this person did this doing this time of his life 100+ years ago, but 100+ years ago that behavior may have been somewhat normal. The other item that I want to make sure we have some clarity on is going to be the bucket theory. And the bucket theory was mentioned in that first chapter, I believe it was by Popper, who sort of used that to describe the ideas of the empiricist. Okay, and what he was getting to, he used it to describe the passive nature of gaining knowledge that they sort of communicated, that we simply just allow observational data to fill us. Remember, they were the ones who basically said we don't want any preconceived notions or ideas. We just want to observe, and then the knowledge comes in, it's somehow elaborated with each other, and then we can come up with theories based on that. Francis Bacon sort of communicated quite clearly the idea that the empiricists had. Bacon and the empiricists stated that we must clear the mind of all biases to allow us to receive observational data. And so they were so keen on trying to avoid bias that many philosophers later believed they sort of forgot the point of why we were doing all this type of stuff. So those opposed to the notions of the empiricists noted that our education, our learning influence our perceptions, as does our physiology, for example, wearing glasses. So we have two individuals, one has a prescription for glasses, the other one doesn't. They're looking at something at a distance. Well, obviously, not only the physical aspect of the individuals doing the observing will have some impact on what they actually see, what they perceive, but also what their education is, what their background is. And so they really pointed to the idea that it's kind of foolish in a way to think that we can have a totally neutral observation. So those opposed to the notions of the empiricists also saw that the goal of observations wasn't just simply to observe. The goal of observations was to see if your expectations are met. Remember the term, and we'll see this real shortly, the idea of theory laden. And the notion was basically that we cannot have a non-biased view of anything. There's no neutral observations, because in actuality, according to those opponents of the empiricists, what we do is to try to find out if our expectations are met. That's why we're doing observations, to see if what we expected to happen actually does happen. And again, that's sort of like bias, but the idea is that bias, we can't get past it. It is part of the process. And so in this last slide here, we talk about anomalies. Anomalies was this idea that Kuhn talked about quite a bit, that paradigm shift because of anomalies. But these data that is gathered when we're doing research that may go contrary to the paradigm, these things are going to be initially fought off, because we love the status quo as human beings to a degree, and the same thing goes as well for science. The paradigm is something they've agreed to, and so when you get something that goes against it, you'll try to ignore it if you can. If it continues, if it becomes a groundswell against the paradigm, then we may see ultimately a shift. So an example that was communicated in the unit about a paradigm shift was the geocentric and heliocentric debate that took centuries to resolve. Remember, this was the idea of it being a Earth-centered universe or a sun-centered universe. And that was the example they used for the paradigm shift. And it took so long because, again, people and scientists, they hold on to the status quo. It's how they see the world, and that does have some sway in science. So the other couple of things here, all observations will be influenced by the views or theories held by the observer. That was the point that hopefully came out as well, as I was stating, that when we observe anything, everything, our previous experiences, everything comes with us, all our baggage. And of course, that will have some influence on what we are seeing, how we understand it. And one of the other ideas about how things can sort of stay for a long time and always remain the status quo is this idea of inattentional blindness. When you expect to see something and you're studying something, it may be quite clear that the data there is talking about what you were focused on, what you were looking into, what you were interested in. But sometimes when you're so focused on one thing, you can miss something else. And that's what inattentional blindness is. And this is where they had the example, I believe, in your textbook about the study that was going on, and the researchers had somebody dress up in a gorilla suit and walk behind in sight of the subjects. But most of the time, they didn't even notice that that had happened, that someone walked by in a gorilla suit, because they were so focused on something else. And per Kuhn, we do not attempt to falsify our paradigm, as Popper suggested, that it's all about falsification. But what Kuhn basically said is we work within the paradigm. The paradigm gives us the structure. We believe in the paradigm, and we do work solving problems to extend and deepen our understanding of the paradigm within the confines of that paradigm. And the last couple of items here, per Lakatos, a research program. And again, remember Lakatos, he was a believer of falsificationism that Popper had proposed, but he didn't think that Popper, his form of falsificationism, was sufficient. So what Lakatos proposed was a research program that had a family of theories that share an unalterable hard core of assumptions. And these assumptions were things that we do not change. These are things which are sort of like sacrosanct, that we don't alter these hardcore assumptions. Uh, but we have these auxiliary hypotheses which are quite disposable. In the textbook, in the textbook, and also I think in the exam, there was an example about space-time versus number of planets. In that example, space-time is something that we would consider a hardcore assumption, that is something that we don't think about changing or altering. But in astronomy and celestial physics, the number of planets can change, because that's part of a more disposable auxiliary hypotheses that were utilized to help explain the theories based on that particular area. And then finally, the item I wanted to cover was the tower argument. And Firebrand, which was the somewhat radical in that particular unit, he stated that Galileo should have rejected the moving Earth view with the tower argument. Basically, the idea that someone goes to a high tower and drop a ball or heavy weight, and it falls directly down to the bottom of the tower. And the belief at the time was, if the Earth was moving, it would have moved by the time the object hit the ground. Therefore, it should have fallen away from the tower, not at the foot of the tower. Obviously, that was seen as a verification, or data that should verify that the Earth is not moving. It is stationary. But according to Firebrand, Galileo ignored that. He came up with ad hoc explanations. He maintained the focus of his theory that, yes, it's still a moving Earth. In doing so, he sort of broke the rules of that time period and ignored them. And that was one of the key ideas that Firebrand suggested, is that in order for science to progress, we sometimes have to break the rules. I'll pause there briefly to see if there are any questions you guys might have.
I have two questions.
Sure.
Um, okay. So earlier when you said basically to see if expectations are met instead of observing from a passive standpoint, was that Popper who said that?
Well, the empiricist wanted to state that we simply are supposed to go out there and observe with no preconceived notions. They believe that preconceived notions would bias your observations. Okay, so Popper called that sort of like a bucket theory. We just simply go observe something, and then the data comes in, and we relate those data points to make a theory. But in essence, what really happens is we already have ideas. We already have theories. We can't avoid it. I mean, and so our training and everything tells us to some extent the theories that we hold. And so when we observe something, we are observing with a purpose. And the observations, the purpose in mind is trying to see if our expectations are met. Like the Bandura study, the Bobo doll study, which I think we'll mention in a future lecture. If you recall, that study was, do children learn aggressive behavior? Do you guys recall the Bobo doll study by Albert Bandura?
Yes.
Okay, and so basically they had this study and they wanted to say, well, if children see aggressive behavior as a model of aggressive behavior, will they, given the right circumstances, also show aggressive behavior? So we went to observe the children in that particular scenario to see if our expectations were met. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so that's basically what that was meant. Was there another question there or follow up?
Yes.
Okay.
Was it Lakatos who came up with the auxiliary
Yes, part of
hypothesis?
basically Lakatos believed that well, basically remember, Lakatos did not appreciate what Kuhn said about how science progresses. Kuhn talked about a lot of irrationality, things which were not logical necessarily, that had a great deal of influence on science. And Lakatos referred to that at times as it could cause mob psychology. So what Lakatos wanted was to develop a way to allow for a theory to survive long enough to prove its worth or not. Because according to the simple way in which Popper proposed falsificationism, as soon as you did one study that created a data set that did not support that particular theory, one could make a case that we should falsify it, and it's destroyed. So they said that would be a premature death for a particular theory. And so what Lakatos did is he devised a system in place that made sense, that was at its heart about falsificationism, but did it in a much logical and systematic way. And more importantly, he stated that before you falsify a theory, you have to have another theory already ready to go to take its place. That was not a part of Popper's initial idea. So you could falsify a theory and have nothing in place of that theory. So that's why the series, the family of theories in Lakatos was important. They shared this hardcore assumption. That's what made them a family of theories. But in order for you to move to the next theory, that new theory had to prove it could examine everything the previous theory could and explain it, and also things that the previous theory could not. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay. So that gives us some of the key review topics that I wanted to make sure that we understood. before we moved on. Now, if there was anyone who joined us before, slightly after the time we started, please, if you haven't, send a chat message to me. Just say present. If you logged in with your name, that's fine. But if not, make sure your name is listed so I know who basically is present today. All right. So what we want to look at now is the chapter that starts off this big section on philosophy of the mind. And this is Descartes and the mind-body problem. All right, so basically with Descartes, looking at the key ideas and concepts here, we began this section talking about the mind. Do we know what it is? Where does it come from? There are so many questions about the mind that, to be honest with you, we still don't fully grasp today. So the mind, it is subjective. How do we know if we are experiencing the same thing as another person? In essence, we really don't, because we don't have the ability yet to go in and see something from somebody else's point of view or from their perspective. So the key thing that we are talking about here is the notion that we are going to be trying to explore what the mind is. And there are a lot of things that pop up when we start talking about the mind and what is the nature of the mind, as we'll see as we go through the following this chapter and other chapters as we get to them. So we talked about initially, we did a sort of an overview of theories of mind. And basically, the first one we talk about here was that only matter exists, meaning there is nothing like mind. It's just mind is a physical manifestation, that we have these physical things that help to create the mind. Another perspective, and that would be materialism. The other perspective is only the mind exists. And this basically says, this is idealism, is that only the world of ideas exists. There really isn't anything else. And we'll talk about that in the next chapter. And then we have what Descartes proposed, and that's the heart of this chapter, is that both the matter and mind exist, the body and mind both exist, and that they are somewhat independent of each other, but they interact in some way. And then the last one was none of the stuff matters, whether or not it's material or mind, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters about the mind is how it aids us in functioning, how it aids us in surviving. And that was the key notion. So that sort of set the groundwork for what we were talking about in chapter 4. So now let's talk about the main guy, Descartes. Descartes, he began to doubt. And why was he beginning to doubt things? Because he started to realize that things that he thought he knew that were true and certain actually sometimes turned out not to be. So he began to doubt a lot of things. There was sort of a crisis for him. And so basically, he believed that he needed to find certain knowledge. Now, along the way, he had several proposed ideas. One of them was the innate ideas do exist, meaning that we come into the world and in our mind, we have ideas like that of God and things of that nature. So Descartes, when he was doubting, one of the reasons that he began to doubt is that he realized from the empiricists, remember the empiricists was all about observation tell us the nature of reality around us, and observations using our senses, that's how we gain knowledge. But Descartes realized that our senses sometimes provide untruths, that we don't always get true information from what we see and hear. So sensory data must be validated. And he was a rationalist, so he used logic and logical thought quite a bit in order to validate and understand what he was saying. So he communicated the notion that for us, anytime we see something with our senses, sometimes we use our senses, we need to make sure they are validated using logic. That was the key thing. So he was not so keen on using the empiricist perspective to gain knowledge because he thought that we could not trust it. So getting back to what he wanted to do, he wanted to build his knowledge base up, get it back so he had things that he could trust, things that he did not have to doubt anymore. And the first thing that he was able to build back, one thing that he could not doubt, was that he, Renee, existed, that he exists. And that gets us to the famous quote I'm sure you guys are all familiar with: I think, therefore I am. So his logic behind it was this: if he doubts, and he is a doubting, thinking being, there must be a doubter, and that's him. Therefore, he exists. This was his certain knowledge. This was the thing that made him more comfortable that he was able to prove that something true and something real does exist. So ultimately, this was the foundation he was able to, according to the research, build back a lots of other certainties about the world. So Descartes' proposition was that of dualism, that both the mind and the body exist separately, but they interact in some way. Descartes never really resolved this mind-body problem. He did believe that the pineal gland was where the interaction between the body and the mind happened because of its central location. But he did not really resolve it to any success in a way. Now, some, as we saw in the textbook, communicated the idea. They wondered if there was a problem at all with, was the mind-body problem really a problem? And basically, they offered up several ideas as to what they were talking about. So is there an issue of how items of different substances can interact? They offer up the idea of property dualism. And property dualism, the mind and body are not two different substances, but they're the same substance, but are different properties. So the same, made of the same stuff, but just have different properties. Then they have the idea of emergent properties. And real quickly, it's basically saying this: a higher order characteristic of a property may not exhibit certain things. For example, when we have water, it's wet and it does have, it's a liquid, it's wet, it has a color to it, but the things that make it up may not have those properties. So they were suggesting that maybe that's what's going on, that we're talking about some sort of emergent properties, is that we don't see properties that of the parts that make it up, but the properties can be seen when we look at the larger, the superordinate item, or the more complex one. So this all led to the possibility that we're looking at pseudo problems, an apparent problem that arises not because of any deep physiological issue, but due to misunderstanding of concepts that are being discussed. So the idea here is that we don't really have a mind-body problem because it could just be terminology that's causing problems. They offer up the idea of the category mistake, where we erroneously treat an idea of one logical category as if it were a member of another. And again, I gave you the personal example, and the same example was in the lecture notes, I believe, as well, that when you believe that one category represents another category. For example, when I went to visit school at Virginia Commonwealth University, I went to Richmond, and I go there to find the campus. I ask somebody, where's the campus located? And they look at me somewhat strangely, and then they just wave their arms a little bit, sort of encompassing the whole of the city. But the idea is that a university, a college, is not buildings, okay? So Richmond, Virginia, the city, is where the college was located, but they were interspersed throughout the city. So what they're suggesting here is that we need to truly understand the mind-body problem, but some people thought that there really wasn't an issue. And so that's what these particular slides are really communicating, that the issue really does not seem to be, or needs to be, a particular issue that we need to worry about so much. That's the basic idea. So we talk about the mind-body problem never being solved, but there were a couple of other key things. Rene Descartes was a phenomenal individual, and we see a lot of individuals and people that we will cover in this course that were quite amazing. Many of them were polymaths, which are individuals who are, as they say sometimes, wicked smart and have a lot of varied interest in things and are really well read on those. But one of the key things that we saw as a major benefit to Descartes' time was that he was considered the modern day father of modern philosophy. Now, he saw mechanical principles as the rule of the universe. Mechanical principles. And this was very much contrary to the views that we saw from previous generations during the time of Aristotle, for example. And Aristotle, as it was mentioned in your text, he believed that special essences have some sort of influence on the universe. That's how he would explain, for example, why it is that rocks fall to the earth or fire seems to reach up to the sky. Because rocks and fire have special essences, the rock wants to be with other things that share that essence. Therefore, that's why the rock falls toward the earth where other rocks are. And that's why the fire reaches toward the sky where the sun is, where heat source is. So what Descartes' addition to here was we no longer had to rely on special essences. He was sort of changing the script, so to speak, when it comes to how the world and how the universe could be viewed. So he saw mechanics, mechanization, and saw that most behavior for animals and humans could be explained through this. So all are machines, animals and humans are machines to greater or lesser complexity. Now, that's not so bad, but again, if you think about what that means, that he's comparing us to animals, some people during the time could have some sort of problem to that. But he also added the following, is that humans have consciousness or minds and animals don't. And the important reason why that was a key thing to add was in this instance, consciousness, minds are seen as souls. Okay, therefore, no souls for animals. Souls are just for us. We are sort of special in that way. So what we see in this particular chapter that Descartes helps us to do, he helps us to focus on studying of the consciousness. He also influenced many areas of psychology. The study of animals became legitimized with his views and ideas, and also the idea of comparative psychology, where we compare what goes on with this particular species with another species when it comes to how they process things and how they behave, as well as cognitive psychology, the study of looking at how it is that we think and all aspects of consciousness. So Descartes was a phenomenal individual. And as we'll see, he sets the stage by asking some very pertinent questions. And what we'll see in the upcoming chapters is that philosophers that come after him, that exist during his time, and also that come after him, they always compare themselves to the ideas of Descartes. So Descartes stated this, and this is my opinion and my view of what I think as it relates to Descartes. So his ideas began the foundation for much and many discussions to follow. So he excited interest in the mind and reality, as we see in the coming chapters, particularly chapter 5, when we talk about Locke and Berkeley, that these individuals will continue the discussion that was started by Descartes, as will others. All right, are there any questions so far? All right, so basically what we see here to sort of wrap things up is the notion that this chapter is important in that it starts the foundation for conversations that will continue for at least the next 2 additional chapters, and then it will be referred to all the way until chapter 18 actually, when I'll have an assignment for you guys as well that talks about some of the things that Descartes proposed and what we look at now that we've gone through most of the course and most of the material. So Descartes is the foundation of just about everything that we're going to be talking in the next few chapters, and then we'll revisit him from time to time as well. At the very beginning of this session, I did remind individuals that I will be posting chapter 5 video lecture today. I'm a little bit behind on that, and I apologize. As well, I know there is an essay assignment that is due. I'm still starting to, I'm grading yours now. I'm going to push that essay assignment back and delay it a little bit, and I'll send an email out with the specifics about that. If you weren't here doing my exam 1 review, I will be sending out a little bit of a PDF, bulleted items just for clarification for that first unit exam as well, and I will be adjusting the grades a tad for exam 1. All right, before I let you guys get out of here, are there any questions or comments you guys have? Okay, so what I will be doing then is I'll be looking at the emails that you guys sent out to me about your preference for days to meet. Regardless, this will be recorded. It is recorded, and I will be posting it anyway on the Canvas site. So if there's nothing else, have a great day, and I'll see you guys later, okay? Bye-bye.
Someone asked a question before you.
Sure.
She wanted to know if you're going to cover chapter 5 on the next discussion.
Chapter 5, as I was saying, I will be posting a video lecture of that today, and there'll probably be a short little discussion item that will help prep you for some of the other stuff that you're going to be doing, like with regard to the essay. Okay, anyone else?
I'm Dr. Hubert. I just want to say I like these Zoom meetings. It feels like I'm in the classroom.
Okay, good.
It really
good.
cements it. I like it. I like it.
All right, well, you guys were talking today, so I appreciate that as well. So we will be covering chapter 5. I apologize for the delay in that. It should have been up, but I just didn't post it. So that's the process. Remember the process. Everything that is being looked for by way of assignment, you can go to the syllabus page on Canvas, and it lists everything down there, all the to-dos, and also go to the modules where it's laid out in sort of a tabular format. All right, if there's nothing else, I'll see you guys on the flip side. Later.
Bye.